Hi, my name's Bilal. I'm a quantity surveyor working on major infrastructure projects in the UK construction industry. I've worked on main contractor side. I've also worked on client side, and I've been in the industry for about 4 years now. In this video, I'm going to be explaining to you in simple terms what a quantity surveyor does. And before we go into that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I went to University of Greenwich back in 2018. I graduated in 2021, and from 2021, I've been in the industry working as a graduate QS, assistant commercial manager, and now a QS. In those 4 years, I've mostly worked on major infrastructure projects, and I've picked up skills working on main contractor side, client side, and at different stages of a project lifecycle. Today, I'm going to be explaining simply what quantity surveyors do. And when I first started, I had absolutely no idea, because when I Googled what a quantity surveyor does, it was saying stuff like commercial management of accounts, cost reporting, and contractual arrangements and agreeing contracts. And I was like, yeah, sick. But it's all high level stuff. And for someone who's in school, college, or university, it might be too much fluff. So let me break it down in simple terms. Even though all of that stuff is technically correct, for someone who's outside the industry, it's really hard to actually grasp what they do. So let's get into it. And before we go into it, by the end of this video, you'll be able to explain it to your little sister. I want to make it that simple. I've got an 8-year-old sister. I want to be able to explain to her what quantity surveyors do. And that should help you decide whether it's actually the right career for you or not. So if you're interested in construction and in quantity surveying, but not sure what a QS does on a day-to-day, then keep watching and I'll be able to help you by the end of this. So to put it simply, a QS is basically the money person on a construction project. That's all they do. Like I could end the video here. That's it. That's the core of every QS's job is basically to control the money on a construction project. Now, let me give you an example. A kitchen extension into the back garden, 2-3 meter extension. Okay. So say you have £20,000 and you start building this thing. The first thing that's going to happen is within a couple of weeks, you're going to run out of money because 20 grand is just not enough for a kitchen extension. In this day and age, and depending on which region you're in, you need at least 70, 80K and probably up to 120, 130K. So if you have 20 grand, you basically screwed. In 3 weeks, you'll have a hole in your wall and you won't even have money until the next year's summer to actually build all this stuff. So what you're going to do, you're going to run to the bank, you're going to scramble and get some money from your friends and family. But what happens if they don't have money? What happens if the bank doesn't want to lend you any money? You're basically screwed. You have a hole in your wall and it's a long day. So what happens in quantity surveying is when a construction project is about to start, a QS comes in and figures out, okay, how much is this spec, this drawing, this whatever it is that whether your kitchen extension, 4 meters, 5 meters, the specification, the width of it, do you want skylights or not, all that kind of stuff. A QS looks at the spec, looks at the drawing, and figures out how much is it going to cost. That's one of the principal things a QS does before construction starts. So this is number one. Number two is whilst you're building and whilst you have the pot of money on a smaller scale, when you're doing a kitchen extension, you might have 50 grand today and you say, okay, let me start. But you know that in 2-3 months, you're going to make 20 grand or you're going to make 30 grand or you're going to make 50 grand. And in 3 months, you're going to have another 30 grand. So you can still start on day one when you have 50 grand because you're not going to spend 50 grand on the first day. But you spend money every week on buying materials, plant, paying the labor, doing this, doing that. And that's what the QS controls. Basically, the QS's job is to make sure that you don't run out of money during the construction phase of a project. The next thing is sort out any cost changes that happen along the way. This is a bit high level, but for example, just to keep it very, very simple and very, very sort of basic, if you're doing a kitchen extension and you're saying, I'm going to go 4 meters deep into my back garden, and then halfway through the design, halfway through the construction, you're like, you know what? I don't want to do 4 meters. I want to do 6 meters. That's a change. That's as simple as it is. So anything that was originally discussed, anything that alters from that original discussion and that original agreement between two parties, i.e. you and the builder, anything that changes is change. And then the QS's job is basically to figure out what is the value of that change. How much extra do I need to pay the contractor? And the contractor's QS is saying, how much extra do I need to charge this guy? how much extra do I charge the client for this additional 2 meters? And sometimes in this example, it might be simple. It's just and the bricks and all the material. But some projects have very, very, very challenging design integrations, design interfaces, and a lot of these changes are millions and millions of pounds. And finally, the QS makes sure that the people on the project, the subcontractors, the material suppliers, anyone in the supply chain gets paid fairly. So if you think about it, any construction project is basically a massive jigsaw with loads of people, loads of different companies, material suppliers, builders, labor suppliers, plant people, the design team, all these different people, and they all fit together somewhere on this puzzle to create the entire project. And the QS's job is to make sure that each piece costs what it should cost. No one's being ripped off. No one's going over budget. The project doesn't go over budget as a whole, and yeah, at the end of the project, the whole puzzle is there at the price that we want it to be there for. That's it. But what a QS does depends on two things, and those two things are here: whether you work for contractor side or client side. And number two, what stage of the project are you on? Are you before construction or are you during construction? These two things affect what QS does on a daily basis. Let me explain. So, first thing, when you work for a client, you're basically working for someone who wants to build that building. In the example of the kitchen extension, say you wanted that kitchen extension or your parents wanted that kitchen extension, the QS who works for you is basically, yeah, they're working for you. But in the industry, in the construction industry, it could be working for the government, it could be working for a developer, it could be working for a big company. For example, HS2. HS2 is a client. Their job is to commission the railway, so get it from a piece of land into a fully fledged working railway. And they want that railway built. And when I was working for HS2, my job was that we don't overpay and we protect the money of the public. Essentially, we're spending taxpayers' money, and my job was to protect the taxpayers' money and basically ensure that it's spent properly, it's spent fairly, it's spent on the right things at the right time for the right price. But now let's talk about what contractors QS actually does. So the people that were working on the other team who were building HS2 for us, they were actually the company who's managing and organizing the supply chain and ensuring that HS2 gets built or a project gets built. Let's go back to a kitchen extension example. You're a client, you want a kitchen extension, you go to one person, you go to a builder in London and they say, yep, it's going to cost 100 grand. That builder goes away and speaks to 10 different people. They speak to the people who's going to do the digging, the foundation. They speak to the concrete company who's going to bring the concrete onto the site. They speak to the plant people, so the people who are going to bring the excavator. They organize a skip. They organize the labor for the demolition. So their job is to manage the entire supply chain. When you're working as a QS for the contractor, your job is to make sure that your company is making a profit, you're managing cash flow, and you're getting paid on time and you're paying on time. So every month you'll be making an application for payment to the client or invoicing the client, basically asking the client, in simple terms, you ask the client saying, we've done X amount of work this month. Can we get paid X amount for the value that we've delivered on site? And then you go away and pay your supply chain, and the difference between those numbers is your positive cash flow. So right now I'm working for a main contractor, which means that we work with clients, we win projects from clients, and we have scope to deliver X, Y, and Z. And we manage the supply chain in order to deliver these projects. And the bit in between is every month we need to make sure that we have a positive cash flow, we're making profits for our company, and we're on track to make profits. And if there are any changes in scope, that we get paid fairly for those changes. So you can think of it like this. When you're working for client side, you're basically playing in defense. You're defending the money of the person who's spending the money. You're making sure that their money is safe and they're getting what they asked to get for a fair and justified price. When you're working for a contractor, you're basically defending the builder. Your job is to make sure that the person who's building this, managing this, and managing the supply chain and putting all the pieces together and doing all the hard work out on site, they're getting paid fairly. Now, remember I said to you there's two things. So that was number one, who you work for. let's look at what changes when it's before construction or during construction. So when you're working before the building starts, you're basically looking at estimating cost. You're looking at planning the budgets for each item and duration, and basically you're making sure that you understand the different components of cost within the build. And in simple terms, what that means is if you're doing that kitchen extension, you need to understand that all these construction activities that happen, you need to understand what's going to happen, when is it going to happen, what are the labor, plant, material inputs for this activity to happen. So how much concrete do you need? How much labor do you need? What plant, equipment, machinery do you need? And what's that going to cost? So you build that budget, helping choose who builds it. So this is basically procurement. So when you're deciding that you want that company to help you build this construction project, you're going to look at their reputation. You know, if we're building a kitchen extension and our neighbors just built a kitchen extension and it's amazing, well, we'll ask them like, who did you get to build it? Because you know what, we'll have some of that. That company was amazing and they did a really good job. So why don't we tell them to come do ours? These are things that come into consideration when you're deciding who chooses to build it and setting up everything. So you're setting up the contracts, you're setting up the site, you're setting up the investigation works that happen before the site, and all that kind of stuff. What happens during the build is you're tracking the actual cost of the construction activities on a weekly and monthly basis. You're managing the changes daily on site. So if something changes, you then have to manage it from a commercial perspective, from a perspective of cost and profit and cash flow. You make the monthly payments to your contractors and the people who are in your supply chain. You sort out any issues with disputes. So, you know, someone might come onto site and say, look, I think you owe me more money, or I did this many hours of work, you owe me an extra £5,000, and then you turn around and say, well, you can't prove that you did this work, or you have all these timesheets here, and you know you didn't work on this day, you didn't work on this day, you didn't work on this day. So actually, I don't owe you an extra £5,000. Bugger off. And the final thing is final accounts. So this one here, and this basically means that when you're doing your construction activities and you have different suppliers working on different parts of the activity, as your suppliers finish what they want to do, you basically close their accounts and say to them, okay, what's the final payment I owe you? You sign it off and you give it to them and you go, that's it. They can't ever come back and say, oh, you owe us more money, or we did this and we did this and you didn't pay us. Once you've done with paying the final account, that's it. So most QSs do either pre-contract or post-contract. Some do both. In my short career, I've had the opportunity to do both. So to summarize, this is what QSs do. But again, the answer is it depends on which type of QS you're asking. There are some QSs who are specialist pre-contract QSs. There are specialist QSs who are post-contract QSs. There are also people who've built a career working for a main contractor post-contract. There might be people who've built a career working pre-contract for a client. So it just depends who you're talking to, what industry they're in, what sector they're in, what kind of projects they work on, what kind of contracts they work on. And if this has been helpful, make sure you drop me a follow, because I'm going to be bringing out a lot more content to help you understand construction and quantity surveying better. Take it easy. Keep building. Keep building.